This episode of the In Focus series features Jake Matthews. Jake is a BJJ black belt and an active fighter in the welterweight division of the UFC.
How's lockdown been going for you guys?
It's been all right. You know, there's a little bit of a gimmick at the start, being able to train in the garage, something different. It was actually quite fun. 10 weeks later, you start getting a little bit itchy and wanting to get back into the gym. So it's good everything's starting to ease up now. But we made the most of what we had, and I think we did a pretty good job with it.
Awesome, man. Well, let's take it back to the very start. This particular moment was taken at our good friend Peter Haddon's show at one of his Night of Mayhems, and he was the promoter for these shows. And eventually, you started working with him once you got to the UFC. Back in these shows, you were still a teen, but you had a very solid build, and it worked for your style back in the day. You had a very strong frame. It worked for your submission fighting and wrestling style, and you were fighting a lot of grown adults, and you held your own and finished most of your fights by TKO or even submissions. I remember back then, even when I started fighting, you heard there was a 16-year-old kid that was a blue belt that was dominating the scene, and every now and then you see him popping up. What do you remember from these early days?
Oh man, it was just fun. It was completely out of, you get paid probably $300 for these fights, and being an 18-year-old, that was good money.
Yeah.
It was just completely for the love of the sport, and I sort of fell into the sport accidentally. I was playing football and I just started training to stay fit. And then my coach at the time asked me if I wanted to jump in and have an amateur fight. So this was my first pro fight. So I had 10 amateurs leading up to this. And the guy I fought, Sam Fiamatei, I believe his last name was, he was already a pretty established fighter. He had like 7 fights or 7 wins, 5 knockouts, something like that. So that's my dad carrying me there. He was pretty worried actually. A big solid boy, my opponent. And, my dad was like, oh, I don't know, we'll see how he goes. So we took the fight, and at the start, he was strong. He's a strong boy. He picked me up in the air, slammed me down, hit me some hard shots. But, I think my frame and my groundwork, as you were saying, it really worked for me. Ended up, I sort of just weathered that early storm and ended up getting a TKO in the second round. So, it just kept going from there, I guess. It's good to get. It was. I think I had my 7th pro fight was my first ever time going the distance. So everything else I finished, and I really prided myself on that. So I just went out there like a bull at a gate, and honestly, back then I had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So that's why I fought so hard.
And man, as you know, back then it was so hard to find MMA gyms that did full-time MMA training. What was your training like back then, and how does it compare to what you do now?
So at this particular point, I was training jiu-jitsu at a jiu-jitsu gym, and I was training in my backyard with my younger brother. And that was pretty much the story of my professional career up until I made the UFC. So I pretty much 90% of my training happened in my backyard. And I'd go to the jiu-jitsu gym, train jiu-jitsu, everything else, all my boxing, MMA, conditioning was done in this little space in the backyard. And then when I had my first UFC fight, still training a lot in the backyard.
Yeah.
I decided I should use the money from that to open up a gym. And that gym was more for myself to train, because being a professional athlete and training in your backyard is not really ideal. So it was really grassroots back then. I mean, the days back at Lilydale fighting in that shed pretty much.
Yeah.
45 degrees and
fun times, mate.
Yeah, I really like to think that I started at real, bare grassroots, and made it work. So I should just show anyone, especially all these big gyms popping up now, should show these younger guys that anyone can get it done.
Oh, definitely, man.
If you put your mind to it, yeah.
Definitely. Now, on the same promotion with Peter Haddon, I don't know what Pete was thinking for this particular show when he had a Croatian team fighting the Australian team. And man, I'll tell you, those Croatian boys could bang. And you fought a very tough Croatian boy too. And you ended up finishing him in the first round, right in his corner. And the crowd was going nuts. I tell everybody, this is one of those shows that was out in the outer suburbs. It's one of the shows where I want to pack very little. So after the show's ended, I just get to my car and go home, because I never know what could happen at these events. But it looks pretty wild there, man. What do you remember from this particular fight?
Oh, that was like majority. It was Australia versus Croatia, and Pete Haddon flew a bunch of Croatians over, like ex-Croatian special forces or something. They're all like tough boys.
Yeah.
And the place was packed full of like Croatian fans as well. And we were the main event. the first thing I remember is fighting at like 12:30 at night. That was like when the main event took place, and I was falling asleep at the back, getting a bit tired.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just went out, and I just remember Tadia being Tadia Magic, the guy I fought. He was really, really strong. He was attacking my leg locks, and I think I rocked him with a punch, and then ended up getting it to the floor. And I think I remember watching the video, and one of his cornermen, as I was just throwing my ground and pound, he's covering his mouth like,
Yeah.
he just couldn't be like, he was just in disbelief at what was happening. But yeah, that was awesome. That got me pumped up. The fact it was Australia versus Croatia. I mean, I don't have anything against Croatians. It was just, you had that sense that you were going to war. You know, there was myself, Dan Kelly, a bunch of other Aussie boys.
Yeah.
And it was pretty back and forth throughout the night with the fights. You know, you'd have, I think a
was.
fair few of the Croatians won. Some Aussies got some good wins. And
It was a bloody night too.
It was, yeah. They were good scraps. And but we were all good afterwards. I remember the following night we went out with Croatian fighters, and you know, they were lovely guys. But it was awesome to have them over, and especially early on in my career, it gave me that I mean, still fighting in Australia, but that international sort of, not only exposure but experience, because you never know, like they're completely different fighting styles to us.
Yeah.
And I've always fought local guys from Melbourne, so it was good to get that experience early on in my career.
Now, speaking of that international part, I'm surprised you still know his name. How much did you know of your opponent back then, and did you guys were able to find any research on him?
There was like one video. I think it was little snippets of highlights.
Yeah.
Of an amateur fight he had like 3 years before this fight. So not really. I mean, you could probably get a sense of his style and what he liked to do. And that video we saw, he was like smashing this guy, and you know, he looked big and strong. And yeah, there wasn't much video at all. Some fights I went in, like I remember Sam, the first photo that you showed, I didn't see any footage on Sam whatsoever. So I didn't know if he was a wrestler, grappler, striker.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind going in like that because I thought I felt well rounded anyway. I was happy to, wherever the fight went, I was happy to fight it there.
Nice, man. You started fighting in a circuit with a lot of familiar names that went on to the UFC, like Vic Grujic, Callan, Dan Kelly. What was it like fighting Callan back in the day? And obviously he's doing good stuff now in the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be careful because me and Cal are training partners now. We've probably, I reckon in the last 4 years at Dan Kelly's gym, I reckon we've done over 1,000 rounds together easily. Our goal is before each fight, when we're on the same card, we try and get like 100 rounds minimum together because we're both welterweights. You know, we're both really evenly matched. But yeah, this fight was for an Australian title. Yeah, and I've still got the belt sitting around somewhere. But Cal was like the guy. He was the guy, not only in Victoria, Melbourne, but around Australia. Everyone knew his name. I think he had multiple belts at this point. He was an absolute superstar. He was a rock star, which is his nickname. So I jumped in. I entered the ring first. Cal came in, and I knew he was going to be athletic because he played pretty high level football, and he jumped up. So some fighters, when they jump in the ring,
I remember that.
And he jumps up, and his head almost hit that bloody ceiling right there. And I was thinking, like, oh, this guy's fit. He's going to be strong. And then, so we knew he was a ground guy, so I wanted to stand up with him. And then we start the fight, and then he lights me up with the combination. So he kicked me in the leg. I think he landed a couple of punches, and then I ended up taking him down. So the whole fight got flipped. He got the better of the stand-up exchange, and then I took him down to the floor. And when we hit the floor, I knew I landed a good punch, so I assumed he might have been a little bit hurt. So I just followed up, and I was completely relentless, and I didn't let up until the fight was done.
Yeah.
Because I knew if I let him get his wits about him and get stuck in a jiu-jitsu exchange, he's probably gonna get the better of me.
Because he was quite high-level jiu-jitsu fighter too, wasn't he?
He was. Before this fight, we both competed at Grappling Industries, and he won purple belt for the weight division and open weight. So, and that was about 2 weeks before this fight. So I was not worried, but I was really wary about his ground game. And I knew as soon as I had to keep it messy. As soon as we slowed down and got into a proper jiu-jitsu exchange, it's going to be a hard night for me.
And what's funny, because you won by submission at this fight.
I did, yeah. But I knew I had him hurt. I think I landed a good knee, a good strike. So I wanted to attack early while I had him hurt.
During this time, there were a lot of up-and-coming guys at your weight division. Did you have a lot of pressure on you being the youngest kid in that circuit, also being that prodigy as well, did you have a lot more pressure walking into these fights? Everyone's trying to take your head off.
Nah, there was actually no one expected me to do well. I think every fight I fought, I was always an underdog, and I was never meant to win the fight. And that just made it so much easier on me because, everyone expected me to lose. So if something went wrong and I lost, I wasn't fussed too much, but I never really cared what people thought anyway. I just got in there just because I love fighting. But yeah, so that took all the pressure off me. And I think if you watch my earlier fights, you probably think I'm a lot more aggressive than what I am now. And that was just because I didn't have any cares in the world. It was, I didn't know if I was going to make a career out of this. Every fight was my last fight and I just wanted to go in and have fun. So I didn't feel any pressure, and I still don't today. There's probably a little bit of pressure considering it's your career and the UFC is very cutthroat. But no, I just went in there and just pretty much, I was good at doing what I did in training. So exactly what you see me do in my fights is how I was in the gym. And I could bring that into the fight. And I think that's what allowed me to win a lot of fights.
It's harder because very little guys can actually translate exactly what they do in the gym into the cage or ring, and vice versa. Like you might have your gym heroes, but they can't perform on a night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. You get a lot of that. And then you get some guys who are very average in the gym, but then they just have a lot of heart and they're able to push in their fights and they get it done. So, and I've seen that a lot as well.
Well said. Back in the good old days when you were still fighting in a ring with the ropes, and you were actually fighting Luke Jameo in this promotion. What do you remember? And what's your thoughts about fighting in a ring? And I think you didn't have your first fight in your cage until you went up into the UFC.
My first fight in the cage was on the Ultimate Fighter. So yeah, with the UFC. Everything else was in a ring. I love fighting in a ring, and I'd still love to fight in a ring. It really goes well with my style, cornering people and getting them to the ground,
cutting them off too.
Yeah, it's a fair bit. It's quite hard to cut people off in the octagon because it's so wide and so open. But this fight was probably the first fight that I was a little bit nervous. It was my first fight in the AFC. It was a big tournament. I was a young kid going in there, so not too much expectation on me. I mean, you had the likes of Corey Nelson and Luke Jameo in there, and Luke just fought for a world title on Legend FC against Li Jingliang, who I've also fought. So the expectation wasn't too high in this fight because Luke was he was already a seasoned guy, but I just went in there the way I always do, just attack with everything I've got, have fun, and ended up coming away with a win, which was good. And it gave me a lot of confidence. I think this is sort of the fight that showed me that I'm of a caliber where I could probably push and make a career out of this and get to the UFC, because when Luke was fighting for a world title just the fight before this one. So to get the win and this was awesome.
Also, a lot of people forget this was back in the day when there weren't many Aussie UFC fighters. I think the only few we had at the time was George Soteropoulos and Anthony Parash, and obviously Elvis has retired. Having the next batch of guys going onto the UFC was a big deal.
Yeah, I think I was one of the original the first eight Aussies to ever be in the UFC. So I like to think of myself, even though I'm only 25, still pretty young, I'm sort of like one of the lead horses and the pioneers trying to pave the way, and also showing guys that you don't have to leave and go overseas to make it in the UFC. And I think, I didn't do that, and I've had a more successful career than 95% of UFC fighters. I've had 13 fights, had some good wins, and I've done it all in Australia, all Australian coaches, all Australian gyms. So hopefully people can see that the only way we're going to build the sport here is if our fighters stay here. If we lose all our best fighters overseas, then the sport's never going to grow. So that was always my mindset. And then this fight just solidified that. I remember probably my most memorable moment from this fight would be I had him on side control, and I started throwing shoulder strikes. Yeah. I don't know why. I just wanted to hit him, and he had my arms wrapped up. So I just tried to hit him with whatever was free, and I ended up making his nose bloody. And so everyone talks about Conor McGregor's shoulder strikes, but I was throwing them way back.
Oh man, you got to see the
look. Don't worry about McGregor.
And like you said, you were training with your dad in your own garage gym. What do you think is the main difference these days with the new batch of fighters coming up the ranks?
I think they they have the world at their feet with these gyms now. The coaches, the level of coaching, the level of the facilities.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a single recovery place in Melbourne
No one knew what that was. And
when I
then
started.
also,
No
when we were
one.
both training, it was so hard to actually get some cage time training or fighting. These days, people can have their first fights in a cage so easily.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, these guys are the word at their feet. They just need to not get complacent because they've got a good, compared to what we had, they've got a good, we're not fighting, I mean, the amateur fights these days are in a cage with camera crews and crowds. I mean, we used to, like I said, we used to fight in a basketball court in Lilydale, and you'd be warming up on the bag next to the person you're fighting. And then you'll fight, and then you might have another fight that same day. And there's no belt. There's no. You get a little trophy. There's no belts. There's no champions. It's like you fight, and then you go home, and that's it. And we used to try and get as many of them as we could. But these guys these days, I see fighters getting a little bit complacent. You just got to stay humble, and I think it's hard to stay humble for these guys. Like I said, with the state of the art gyms that we have now, I think that was the main difference. Was just we know how good we've got it, and I think that's why. Fighters like myself, even Jimmy Croup, he grew up in Bendigo. All his training was in Bendigo. And there's not much there at all. So we don't get complacent. We know what we have, and we're grateful for it. Mate.
Now, speaking about that shed in the basketball stadium, you actually fought one of our old training partners at the time. I tell all my friends, this was almost like the Wild West. You rock up on a day, you pay your whatever it was, $30, $50, put your name down. I think there was an option where it says if you wanted to wear shin pads or no shin pads. You weren't wearing shin pads here. My mate was wearing shin pads. And then I think you guys it was no headshots, I believe, but you guys could still kick as hard as you want to the legs. What do you remember from these kind of events?
I could not wait for whenever it was one Sunday a month or whenever the Lilydale was on.
I think so, yeah.
I couldn't wait for these events. Yeah. I just like exactly what you said. You walk in, there's no one sitting in the crowd pretty much. You jump on the scales and you have no idea who you're fighting. And they'll say, look, we'll try and match you up to the closest weight we can. So normally there's, your opponent might be a couple of kilos heavier, a couple of kilos lighter. You never know. Yeah. And you don't even know what they look like until you jump in the ring.
Yeah.
Because they just yell out two names and you don't know who the other people are. And then you hop in the ring and then that's when you know who you're fighting. And you have no idea what their skills level is, what their style is, what they, how strong they are, nothing. So that was good. That was good to keep in I guess, an open mind when fighting. And I still take that into my fights. With these fights, you can't go out there saying, I'm going to strike this guy and knock him out because he might be a great striker. You can't say, I'm going to take him down and submit him because he might be a high-level jiu-jitsu guy. So you had to sort of just see where the fight went and feel it out. And that translates still today. Like I said, I mean, my fights now, I could be fighting, a good striker in the UFC, but it's so unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. And this sort of event taught me that exactly. So, but yeah, I remember fighting. I think there was one time I had 3 fights in one day. Yeah. And then my old man, he said, I want you to fight this guy. And he points at the guy. And I was like, I was like 65 kilos back then. And he points at this guy. He's about 90 kilos and looks like a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not fighting him. There's no chance. But Dad goes, get in that ring and fight him. I was like, oh, when Dad says something, you got to do it. So I was like, all right. So I hopped in and I fought the guy. And I ended up TKOing him in I think it was maybe like a minute. And my dad knew I would have done. My dad knew I could beat him. He just wanted me to know that and instill that confidence. So that's probably one of the most memorable moments from fighting in Lilydale.
Man,
and it just goes to show it doesn't matter what they look like. You can't judge a book by its cover.
Definitely.
So it was awesome.
It's hard to see these kind of shows getting passed anymore. But like you said, it was a great experience. I had a few fights here myself, fighting 2 or 3 times a day. So you could be fighting MMA, kickboxing, Muay Thai afterwards. And like I said, you never know who you're going to fight until you're both in the ring.
It's a shame they don't do them anymore because it builds a lot of character, these events.
Yeah, and also a few concussions too.
Yeah, and these are the stories that we're going to tell our grandkids. We used to fight in the shed in Lilydale and there was blood everywhere. Like the blood on that canvas was probably like 5 years old, but we didn't care. We just got in there.
Now, transitioning from just a fighter into a coach, a trainer, and also a gym owner, what's it like for you to corner your own guys into battle and also guiding them through what you learned as a fighter yourself?
I'll start off by saying, so when I fight, I don't suffer like any nerves at all, pretty much. I don't know whether it was playing high-level football or what it was. I don't get nervous. I get anxious and I want to fight, but there's no nerves. when I have one of my fighters or even a friend who fights, I'm absolutely beside myself, and I'm nervous and I have butterflies in my stomach. And I think that's more because I can't control what they're doing in there. I'm not in there. I can't control what's happening. And I get that nervous, especially when Side's one of my best friends.
Yeah.
When he fights,
He's a wild one. Hey,
he's a wild one. He's one of those ones in training. There's I mean, we train at Dan Kelly's gym with like UFC fighters, and I won't go into detail, but there's barely a person at Resilience Training Center that Saeed can't belt on any given day. He's one of the hardest training partners that I train with, one of the most skilled training partners that I train with. He just needs to learn to transition that into his fights. If he could bring what he does in training into Hex, he would be the Hex champion within a couple of fights easily, and he could compete with guys. I've trained with UFC fighters that he would towel up, and he just needs to bring that into his fight.
Do you think it's that Iranian wrestling background that he has?
Yeah, well, he actually didn't start wrestling, so he's a refugee, and he didn't start wrestling until he was in a detention center.
Wow.
Here in Australia, yeah. So he started late with the wrestling. So it's a pretty good story. He's got a great story too. But it'd be awesome to get him on and talk about his story and everything. Yeah. But going from a fighter to a coach, I've always, even with my training partners, I've always tried to put in my 2 cents and give people advice. Whether they take it or not, it's up to them. But I've always liked to be not so much a leader, but I like to help people and try and coach. So I transitioned into the coaching role really well. I do get really nervous for my fighters, but yeah, I love opening a gym. I was always, alongside fighting, my dream was to open a gym and run a gym, coach fighters, help other people reach the UFC and keep building the sport in Australia. And I think long after I'm finished fighting, I'll still be coaching. I'll still be on the mat rolling, trying to help guys. So even though my gym, we've closed my gym for the time being, I'm still at other affiliate gyms, coaching, putting my time in, trying to help the boys.
Perfect, man. Now, in a moment like this, when one of your fighters has lost a fight, what do you normally say to them to ease a moment?
I don't say anything. I don't say. I'll look at the one who's just had a fight. Then I was wearing fight shorts. Everyone's like, Jake's ready to have a brawl after the fight.
There's always a guy in the corner that's in short shorts and not wearing shoes at all.
I don't say anything because I know when I fight, when I've had a loss, nothing you say to me within the first half an hour is going to sink in. It's in one ear, out the other. It's just, and I know because I take losses really hard. I try not to show that, but I do, and I just need a good half an hour to sit and just relax. And Saeed probably takes the losses the hardest out of anyone. He believes he's let his friends down, his family. He reckons he's let the whole of Iran down. That's how hard he takes his losses. So I just leave him. His brother and other coaches are in his ear trying to tell him what he did wrong, what he did right. I feel like there's no point telling someone what they did wrong. It's done now. The fight's finished. You can't go back in time and change what he's done. There's always time later to explain to someone what they did wrong. Yeah. And I believe that's when they're back in the gym training. I think they just need time just to, he knows what he did wrong. He can just relax and try and, I'll just go buy him a Scotch and Coke, bring him out into the crowd, mingle with the boys, have a laugh, make him feel better. And it's hard to, I've learned that through fighting myself. You get some coaches that might not have fought much and I don't think they understand that. And they're yelling at their fighters after the fight. And it's real, you're already broken after a loss. So I just sort of let them go. And I find that sort of works best.
Do you think you have the advantage, since you're currently fighting, to relate to one of your fighters after a win or after a loss because you're sharing that moment as well?
Oh, absolutely. If my fighter loses, I lost. I'm almost in tears when my fighters lose. Even amateur fights, during the fight where before the fight, I'm in their face trying to pump them up. During the fight, I'm yelling at them. In the corner, I'm in their face yelling. After the fight, if they've won, I'll celebrate with them. But, after the fight's done, it's done. So you can't do much about it. Especially if they've lost, I just let them have their time. But during the fight, you'll hear me during the fights. You'll hear me yelling. Yeah.
Going back to the old days, could you shed some light on this moment here? I remember it was a very close fight and it was a very controversial decision.
Yeah, I don't even know what happened with this fight. Anyone who can watch that fight could say I clearly won. So it was supposed to be. So I was only 17.
Yes.
So apparently, what happened is,
I think you slipped through the
yeah,
cracks back then when there was a rule that got passed that you had to be 18 to compete with adults.
yeah, I was still 17, and I don't know. I mean, to me, I clearly won the fight. I won the striking exchanges. I landed like a number of takedowns. You know, had good top control in the fight. I think there's a bit of politics and stuff come into that one, and I'm pretty sure that got made like a no contest afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot going on, and people, you know, the officials were all talking together, and I don't know, but
Even if you look in the
yeah.
crowd at the ring girls, at the officials, everyone is looking very confused, thinking that the decision should have went the other way.
Nah, everyone didn't know what was going on, and I was ready to fight everyone in that event. I was pacing up and down, like I wanted to get there and fight again because it was a pretty dominant win. Wouldn't have been a split decision; would have been a unanimous for me. But yeah, it was really weird because I don't know because Anthony. I don't know if he still fights or not, but before me, he had pro fights because I watched the fights and studied him.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years ago, he made his debut on AFC, and I was like, all right, well, I've seen him fight pro fights before, so I have no idea what went on with this fight. But yeah, it was like I said, it was a good learning curve. I jumped in. I was like 17, fighting an adult, and it was full rules. You know, we could throw knees, elbows, punches on the ground, submissions. And it was a good mixed bag, that fight. It was good stand-up, good takedown, you know, on the ground, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. So it was pretty much the whole bag of mixed martial arts was in that fight. And once I settled down afterwards, I just took it as good experience. Yeah, but that was a weird night, that one. I still don't know till this day what happened.
It was a great experience too, man. Like you said, you were 17 fighting these grown adults at these kind of shady looking suburbs basketball stadiums. It was a learning experience, and eventually, you know, you took what you learned and then you took it into the UFC as well. What's it like to finally make it onto the big stage and then also fighting on home turf?
I don't know. Probably my first fight was pretty surreal, but I've always stayed really composed. So, and you know, from the Luke Jamo fight, in my mind, I was definitely going to make it to the UFC.
Was that the breaking point?
It was, yeah. That was when I always wanted to be in the UFC. Don't get me wrong, but that fight was like, okay, I'd have what it takes to make it. And to me, I was already at the level where, you know, I could compete with those guys. Like I'd always back myself against anyone in a fight. So even when my first fight came around and we got the email for the contract, it wasn't so much disbelief. It was just excitement. And I mean, now 13 fights in, it's just normal for me. You know, you're walking in the hotel and you're John Jones and Brock Lesnar's and Daniel Cormier is walking around, and you're not a fan anymore. You're a peer. You're a colleague. You're all fighting on the same stage. And it's, you know, when I sit and think about it, it is pretty crazy. But like I said, I've done it for that long now. It's normal for me. But the first fight was pretty surreal, and I think just how professional the UFC is, and everything's clockwork. They'll tell you, I don't know how they do it, but they'll say to you, you're fighting at 8:30. And in my mind, I'm saying, oh, if all the fights finish, I'll be fighting earlier. But no, you fight at 8:30, and they'll tell you what time you're out of there. And then once the fight's done, they don't want to know you. That's it. You're done. You had your fight. Just go back to your hotel.
Yeah.
Pack your bags. You're heading home in the morning. So it was a different experience compared to the you know, the local events.
Like fighting
and that was the biggest
fighting
shock.
at 1 a.m., coming home at 3 a.m.
Yeah, there's none of that. No, there's none of that at all. You know, fighting during the day was probably the biggest thing you had to get used to. I mean, we fought amateur during the day, but to have all my pro fights were at nighttime, and I always expected the UFC fights to be at nighttime, and then we fight in Australia and we're fighting at 10 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
So that takes a bit of an adjustment to get used to. Yeah. But I mean, for me, I always visualized myself being in the UFC. You know, so it is cool, but I was never. Yeah, I always expected it, so it wasn't that big of a shock. And
I think a lot of guys in the circuit from our day knew that you'll get there eventually. It was just a matter of time. And like for myself and my mates, it was no surprise you putting in the time, you training incessantly the way you were, you know, not backing down from fights. Eventually you'll get there.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what the guys need to realize, you know. You just got to keep, you know, I mean, I got to the Ultimate Fighter, I didn't win. I came back to Australia and I still stuck at it. And I got in, had another fight, had a really tough fight. And then I showed the UFC what they wanted to see. And then that's when I got the contract. So having losses and, it breaks people, and it's probably for a lot of the, if guys go undefeated for a while and end up losing, that can be it for them. They need to understand that this sport is a marathon. You have to treat it like a marathon. Don't be in a rush to get in the UFC. Don't have it in your mind that you're going to have 3 fights, 3 wins, and then get in the UFC. There's only a very, very select few guys that will be able to do that. Maybe maybe they're a high-level kickboxer. Maybe they've got a previous, they've done well in some other sort of martial art. So don't expect that to be the case. I had 7 pro fights, and I won all my pro fights, and that's what I got into the UFC. You look at Callan, fought for years and years, one of Australia's, best veterans, best fighters, and he's had so many fights and had a really hard track to the UFC. But that's what it takes.
If there was one piece of advice you would give to up and coming fighters, what would it be?
I've got a few that I normally say. So the first one is, you got to surround yourself, and everyone's probably heard this before, but it's a bit cliche, but you have to surround yourself with people that are of the same mindset and on the same path. So if you want to make it to the UFC and you're hanging out with guys who go to the pub every night and get drunk, it's hard to stay on track when you're around those sort of people. So not saying like get rid of your mates, by all means. Like, you got your friends, you need your friends outside of fighting. It distracts you from fighting. I have mates that have nothing to do with fighting. They don't fight, they don't train. We do other things. That keeps my mind off fighting, which is a good mental break. But if you're training at a gym, get amongst the members at the gym. Get a good group going there. If you see someone that's if you got a high level fighter at the gym, take the time to talk to them, pick their brain. Try and if you've got good coaches there, like, approach the coaches, try and ask for help when you can. You really need to just have a good pack around you that are on the same track, and you work towards it together. And at the start, it was pretty lonely at the start for me, because I was training in my backyard. But I had the mental toughness to get through that. Now we've got I've got a group at Dan Kelly's gym. So we've got myself, Jimmy. We've built it up. We've got this group now, and honestly, when one of us go to have a fight, it's as if we're all going for the fight. We've got a really good group behind us. The enthusiasm's always there. Keeps you motivated. You want to go to the gym and train. So I think that's very important, is the atmosphere that you have.
Yep.
And the other thing is I tell people, like I said earlier, don't get complacent. Never think that you're the best. There's a lot of fighters now. I don't understand it. These guys aren't even in the UFC. They're like local fighters, or they just fight within Australia. But the way they talk and and it's all hype. The vibe they give off, they're hyping themselves up, and it's too early for themselves to do that. And it gets to a point where they start believing their own hype, and I believe a lot of these guys do. And you've got guys like myself, Jimmy. We're pretty humble. If you met us and you didn't know about the UFC, you probably wouldn't know we fought. And then you got these other local guys that are out on social media, and they're acting like they're UFC champions. Because they've had a couple of good wins. Don't get complacent like that. Doesn't matter how many fights I've won in a row, doesn't matter who I've beat, I'll look myself in the mirror and I'll tell myself there's nothing special about me at all. Whether I believe it or not, I tell myself that, and that's the mindset I have when I go every training session. I'll say there's nothing special about you at all. You're actually probably not that athletically gifted. There's not one thing that stands out that you're really good at. And when I have that mindset, I go into training and I know I have to give 120%. Because when you start getting complacent and thinking that you're God's gift, you go into a fight and you think that you can fight at 70% and beat this guy. It's not the case. And it's a trap that a lot of guys get caught in.
Yeah.
And they're showboating and they're flamboyant. And then that's when they'll start, they'll fight someone who's tough, and they'll take a loss.
Yeah.
So I go into every fight as if this guy is 10 times, but it just makes me go into the fight a lot harder. And it's probably a bit funny for people to hear that, but that's something that works for me. So they're the two things that I reckon these younger fighters need to focus on. So it's pretty much being humble and just having a good group. If you're if the gym that you train at is good or not, and I think you should branch out and try and find you know, there's nothing wrong with going and training with elite jiu-jitsu guys and going and training with elite strikers at another place. You have to cross-train. Especially, yeah, even though we've got big gyms, no single gym has the best of everything.
Yep.
So I think it's good to branch out. You know, if you know of some high-level jiu-jitsu guys, go train with them, and et cetera, for the other aspects as well.
Perfect, man. That's really well said. Moving on to our last image. This has to be the most hairiest fight I've ever seen fight. What was it like fighting someone like that? And do you think that affected you in any way?
Nah, I mean, mentally it was annoying because, I mean, this is like a massive UFC card. And, you know, there's so many good fights on it and there's so many questions to ask. But all I was getting asked about was this guy's body hair. And I was like, I'm going into a fight. I'm going to a war. You know, I don't want to be sitting having a laugh with journalists. I'm trying to get into a mindset and they're asking me about body hair. So that was the only thing that sort of annoyed me. But at the end of the day, we're entertainers. It's what it's about. It's part of the job. So you just got to suck it up and do it. Yeah. But yeah, I actually thought it was going to help my grappling because I thought it would give me more friction and be able to grab. But it was actually worse. It was like 10 times slippery. It's like he had oil all over his body. It was weird. But yeah, but this fight, I mean, it was second time I fought it. So I think only myself and Rob Whittaker have fought at Marvel Stadium twice, which is good with the big event, big crowds. And yeah, this fight was I come back after close to about 10 months off because I had a daughter, so I've got my 15-month-old at home. So I thought I'd take some time to spend the early months with her. I think it's important.
Yep.
And the fight before this was a loss, so I had a loss, 10 months off. So coming into this fight, it was a pretty strategic fight. I just wanted to just do enough to stay up on the scorecards. You know, if I hurt him or there's a chance to finish it, I was going to take it. But I was trying to have a real technical fight in this one. Not do anything stupid, not get caught. Because, you know, after a loss and then 10 months off and then potentially another loss, that could be your walking papers.
Yeah.
So each fight's like a chess move. So that's how I took this fight. And, you know, got the win, got back in the win column, and then I had Emil Meek offered to me, which is the next fight after that. And that's when I switched it up a little bit more and had a good, exciting fight.
Perfect, man. Well, Jake, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hearing about your next fight announcement.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Lou. I appreciate it, man.